Nick, welcome. Tell us a little about yourself, your journey to this point as a CEO and as an entrepreneur.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you the quick background. So I'm currently the CEO of Gainsight. I've been running Gainsight for the last 8 years. We're helping businesses become more customer centric by having more proactive ways to engage with their customers. People call that customer success, and by building products that are more easily adoptable and with great experiences. My journey to Gainsight kind of started, I guess in my childhood. Sort of got into technology as a kid. Was kind of programmed and played video games growing up, and was around technology a lot as a child. Was very privileged that my dad worked in tech, and so I got computers early. So I had computers in my house from when I was a little kid. A lot of people didn't have that fortune, but because I had that, I kind of saw that I loved technology. Went to school, briefly kind of flirted with the idea of being a doctor just to please my mom, who, being an Indian American, that's nothing makes parents happier than being a doctor. So I majored in biochemistry, but I actually did a master's in parallel in computer science, which is sort of what I loved. And so then I graduated in the late 90s, started a company in college, an early .com company, which was very exciting for a time. It didn't end up being successful, but raised venture capital and actually was on a really good path for a bit. And then worked in a big company in Symantec as a product manager, then eventually a head of a division at Symantec. And then ran my first SaaS company, a company called Live Office, which I then sold back to Symantec, which is the company I worked at in 2011. And in running that company, Live Office, I saw the importance in a subscription business of not just getting new customers, but focusing on your existing ones. And that's why I do Gainsight. So that's the
Awesome.
quick version.
Well, great journey to this point, and congrats on all the success you've achieved at both Gainsight and building the customer success industry. I think to many of us, your company is synonymous with the industry.
Thanks.
You mentioned sort of in our email exchange arranging this interview that you are a person of color in the tech industry, but you hadn't really felt major issues on your ascent. Obviously, it was helpful to have a father who was in the tech industry.
Yeah.
And you had a great educational base. Would love to just hear, you said that there were some minor issues along the way. What were some of the obstacles that you felt that you had to overcome as a person of color in the industry?
Yeah, sure. And as you mentioned, I would say I'm extremely on the privileged side for sure. I think it's actually complex to talk about where do Indian Americans fall in this spectrum, right? Because we certainly are not white and don't present as white, but at the same time, we're very much normalized, I think, in technology. And so I think I spent a lot more of my time saying, how do we help underrepresented minorities? But I'll give you my personal story just to sort of share. And mostly it's just privilege. Like I said, growing up, parents were around and they were very loving. And my dad worked in tech. My mom briefly worked in tech as well. So, and we weren't rich by any means, but, upper middle class, and, my parents could pay for college, which is a huge thing a lot of people can't do. So a lot of privileges. On the minor side, I would say growing up, I grew up in a heavily white suburban neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Great area. Love Pittsburgh. But definitely was like one of two Indian Americans in all of high school, and, a few thousand people, or I guess probably 1,200 people or 1,300 people. And, maybe 20 total non-white people, something like that. It's very, very, very much stuck out like a sore thumb. And so I think it was actually kind of honestly a lot of minor things. Like, of course, a lot of people made jokes about, you must, you're gonna be a doctor. Some of those jokes are true, by the way. Like my parents wanted me to be a doctor, but made jokes about all the stereotypes of Indian people, which a lot of them are positive, but still they're kind of like, they kind of put you in a box. Some people made, more ethnic slurs and things like that. I remember some of those growing up, but it wasn't super common. It happened. Sometimes it was confusing. Like, I don't think they even knew what I was. So they made a slur that was not actually intended for somebody like me, but they just didn't know what box to put me in. I definitely felt very alone. And I've talked about this, that I actually didn't really have any friends growing up. I don't think that was just because of my ethnicity or race or anything. I think that's more about me, but yeah, you can definitely, like, when you see an environment where nobody looks like you do feel like just naturally you don't feel like you fit in. And I empathize with that now of like, Black people in technology, where they feel many times like they don't see people like them. So I had a lot of that. I ate alone, lunch like alone in school every day from kind of kindergarten through 12th grade. So I just never really felt like I fit in. I think the thing that I do, and going back to kind of like trying to empathize with people who are underrepresented, I did feel kind of, and probably still to this day, felt like ugly, because I didn't look like, the white guys that are on TV, right? Like that's the handsome white guys on TV. And, and that's, those role models are changing a lot now on TV and movies. But that when people talk about representation, that resonates with me, because as a kid and probably to this day, I still felt like, I'm fine, but I'd be better if I was white, right? Like it's better, right? Like that's not what I believe, but that's sort of what subconsciously you pick up, not because anyone was intending it, but just because that's sort of the norm, right? And so, especially growing up in a very kind of very homogeneous population, I was embarrassed whenever my parents would be like, dressed up in Indian clothes or things like that. I would be embarrassed about that, very embarrassed, and I didn't want to go associate. Like there's a term, as you probably know, Vinay, that's called ABC, American Born Confused Desi, and it means like somebody who sort of looks Indian, born in America, doesn't really know what they are. And so like I didn't want to go to Sunday school, which is an Indian thing to learn, Hindi, which is language in India. I didn't want to do Indian traditions. Like I fought all that, so I kind of feel like I wish I hadn't fought that now, right? And then creates just lots of confusion even to this day of like my parents would refer to people as either being American, which meant white. Like, for example, that boy, that friend of ours kid, he married an American, and that means a white person. Right? And so even though we're American, I was born in America, right? But like American means white person. So this isn't just like white people enforcing stereotypes. We did too, like we all did. And so I think there was just this sort of like feeling of we're like an other, but I didn't feel like I was Indian either. I still don't. Like, I mean, honestly, am I American? Sort of. I think I am. I was born in America. I love America. But, do I think of myself as a stereotype of American? No, because a stereotype of American is a white person in my mind, right? And even though I don't believe that, like mentally, that's just like what, if you looked in my brain, that's probably what would come up. And am I Indian? No, like not at all. I love India. When I go to India, we have a big team in India. I feel like an outsider. Yeah. What am I? I don't know. Honestly, the place
you're an ABCD.
An ABCD. The place where I feel more at home, frankly, Vinay, is California, because you look around and you don't see everyone looking the same. So I feel like a lot of people feel like they don't neatly fit in a box. And just as a fun anecdote, anytime I get in a taxi, if there's like an Indian person driving a taxi, like they start talking to me. First, they say, "Where are you from?" And I say, "I'm from Pittsburgh." And they're like, "No, where are you from?" And I'm like, "Oh, suburban Pittsburgh." They're like, no. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, my parents are Gujarati." And then they start talking to me in Gujarati Hindi. I'm like, "Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying," And so again, like the reason I share these stories is nobody's trying to do anything bad. These are like sometimes people of color doing these things. It's just sort of like the fact that like systemic stuff exists. And obviously like the opportunity for us is now being in a privileged position to try to help other people that feel that way.
So let's talk about kind of the tech industry today. And what are the issues that you see that we as leaders in the tech industry need to grapple with and take on when it comes to issues of equity and race?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, there's obviously a big equity discussion around gender. And that's not the topic but I think that's extremely important. We have a long way to go. But, I think we started from a easier starting point. Like when I reflect at Gainsight, we put a big focus on women in leadership at Gainsight and women in general in Gainsight. And we have more work to do, but we've come a long way. But we didn't start from near zero. It's actually really hard to start from near zero, right? And that's one of the things I've reflected on in the tech industry. In many cases, when you think about representation of Black people and Latinx people, you're starting for many companies, including Gainsight, from near zero. And the hard part about that is that like those first few people, as research has shown, don't feel great because they are the few, right? And there's not people like them. And so you end up in the situation of like, you can have retention issues, right? Because you bring people on and, they don't see people like them and then they move on. And so we have a long way to go. The starting point isn't what it was with women in tech. It's like way harder. and we have to work even harder to get there. And so, but the objective stats are just super clear, across all parts of tech, that representation of Black and Latinx people is way, way lower than the representation in society.
So as a leader, I'd love to hear, first what you're trying to do inside your own company to change things, and then really excited about the work that you're doing more broadly in your industry. But let's first talk about kind of what you're doing inside Gainsight and what's worked and, what's the struggle?
Yeah, I'll tell you. And I'd say there's a lot of struggles that we have to get over, more than things that have worked, because I think we are early in our journey. One thing I just say up front about why we care about it, because I think it's important for companies to sort of, anytime you're doing anything, say, why do we care about this, right? And so in our own view, in my personal view, I think that representation of Black and Latinx people and underrepresented minorities in tech is very important, because technology is a unbelievably lucrative profession. And so if you exclude people of certain backgrounds from technology, you're reinforcing this massive wealth and income disparity that disproportionately affects underrepresented minorities. And without that wealth, you don't get power and politics. And so it's like you have to crack this in technology. It's so important. I talked to an entrepreneur who's starting a venture fund to focus on Black founded businesses. And he said, until you solve the money issue, all the other social issues are much harder to solve. So that's a personal why. For a company, we believe in this concept of human first business, this idea that like business can't just be about the transactions and the deals. It's got to be about the human beings at your customers and your employees and their families and your community. And so we think about being human first, having diversity, equity, inclusion is so critical to that concept. And it's all of our values kind of really require us to care about it. But despite that, we've done a very poor job on representing Black and Latinx people at Gainsight. And you have to kind of own that up front. We have a small handful of people. And just like every company, it wasn't intentional. We were trying to be fair, but the results are the results and you have to own them, And so that's the first thing we have to do is own it. Obviously, the murder of George Floyd sparked this national conversation, even though those things were happening for a long time, right? But just because of the uniqueness of 2020, it sparked a unique conversation, and that created an opportunity for us at Gainsight to talk openly about this topic, both with everyone as well as with our employees of underrepresented minority status. And so we did a few different things. Of course, I'm sure similar to your company, Vinay, we did right when things happened, kind of roundtables for the whole company. We had some outside speakers come in. We've hired some consultants to help. And that's been great. But then did those small roundtables with a small group of people from those underrepresented groups, just talking about like, what do they feel like, and learned so much, right? Like just about as an example that, it's not always things people are doing. It's just that they don't see people like them in management, in the company in general. And so they doesn't feel as included, even though they might feel more included at Gainsight than other companies. It still doesn't feel as inclusive as, let's say, the communities they're in outside of work, right? And so that means we're not living up to our human first purpose. Like we just genuinely are not with these folks. A second thing is that we're not, that we need to make sure that when you have these brief moments where society's waking up, that you don't lose the momentum later on. There's just a natural cynicism. This conversation is like started and stopped for America for a long time, a decade, my whole life, right? There's something that happens. There's a lot of news about it. It's on Twitter. And then it just, goes back to like, oh, we're just back to regular life. So I think the second thing I learned is there's some level of, cynicism that's rightful, that this is not going to change. And so you have to kind of keep that dialogue going. So in my case, like setting up a monthly roundtable. So we have that just on the calendar. We're going to keep talking about it. That's an important, I think, dialogue. Or I think it might be every few months, by the way, not monthly, but every few months. And so having some level of persistence to it. The third thing is, when we think about hiring, obviously a lot of companies, we think about the panels of who's on that hiring panel, as well as the people that we're bringing in, both sides of it, right? And, we do a lot of things to try to have a balanced slate, but I think we can do more to make sure that we have, some of the folks that are, underrepresented in the company in those interview processes to really have them be able to help guide the process, help make the candidates feel comfortable. They see people that look like they come from the background. But short answer is, I think we're just in the early days of it. We're in the listening phase and trying to define it. We came up with a more concrete way to do things externally. One of the other realities with 2020 is we're not hiring a lot this year for reasons that are obvious given the economy. But what we saw was that it's kind of good bridge to the external. the CS industry as a whole, customer success, is a super fast growing job. According to LinkedIn in 2019, it was the sixth most promising job in the world. But even in CS, there's not great representation. Customer success in some ways is actually quite diverse. There's relatively about 50-50 men and women in CS. So that's great. That's better than tech. But from a Black and Latinx perspective, there's a very, very small number of people, like a handful. It's hard to know for sure because there's no good stats on this, but anywhere between maybe 1 or 2% and like 8% of CSMs on the high end are Black and Latinx versus the population, which is obviously much, much more than that, right? And so we know there's an opportunity, and we said, well, how do we actually have an impact, not just at Gainsight, but across all of our customers? And we have, as you know, Vinay, we have a big community of customer success folks. So we basically decided right just a couple of days after the George Floyd murder to actually launch a program, and we took a couple months to put it together, where we would help underrepresented minorities get into tech through customer success, because it's a job that is growing fast. It's also a job that doesn't require like you have tons of pre-existing experience in tech. You just have to have really good customer skills, good empathy, good communication. People have that from all backgrounds, right? You don't have to have worked at Google or Facebook or something before. You don't need a computer science degree, right? It's actually a good level playing field for getting in if you do it right. And so we basically decided, let's create a program. We partnered with an organization called SV Academy, which is their whole mission is training underrepresented people to get into tech. And we said, let's work with them, create a program for training people into customer success, what we call a customer success associate, meaning like an entry-level CS position. Let's actually partner with our customers and get them to sign up to help sponsor a scholarship into these programs for these students or workers coming into the world, and actually then offer them an internship in their companies. And it's been incredible to see the response. First of all, one of our investors, Insight Venture Partners, said, we'll do this for a huge chunk of their company. So they wrote a big check to fund this. And then a lot of individual companies said, we'll actually sign up as well and be part of this program. So it's been phenomenal. Early days, we just announced it a few days ago. But with that announcement, more and more companies reached out and said, we want to be part of the program too. Companies are looking for ways to help. And this is a small way I think we can help. The way we measure the success of this is that customer success, like a lot of parts of tech, can be a lucrative job. You can make six figures eventually in the job. And so our goal is to create $100 million of increased wages over time for the people in this program, meaning they were in a situation where maybe they were making prior to this an hourly wage or something like that. And now they're going into this world where they can make, six figures. You add that up across lots of people, and that could be a lot of increased wages for people.
Awesome. And what are you finding has been the interest with applicants, with candidates into the program? I know it's early days, but what's that response been like so far?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, I think it's too early to have any numbers, but SV Academy, luckily, that's their kind of thing. So they work with, for example, historically Black colleges and universities to basically create on-ramps into tech, and they actually help not just recruit people, but actually train them on some of the soft skills of working in tech. Because there's a lot of things that we take for granted, but that might be new to somebody who hasn't worked in tech before. So early days, but I think that part is going to be pretty straightforward because there's a ton of people out there. It's just connecting them with the right opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think this notion of getting to the root cause is critical.
Yeah.
And I think your observation that it starts with sort of creating an economic future for people is also a really good observation as well. I also think there's a systemic issue around just high school education and even early education that has to get tackled as well if this is really, really going to change.
Totally agree.
But I love the proactive stance that you're taking in your industry where, you're a leader and you can have impact as well.
One other comment I'd make, by the way, I forgot one thing, which is I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to do is, in addition to this program and all that, is just try to learn more. Because I feel like part of this is we live in our own little bubbles, and I live in a bubble of just like privileged tech executive, grew up with, enough money that I didn't have to worry about lots of things. So just reading a lot. I love reading in general, so as an example, reading, I'm sure many people read like White Fragility or How to Be an Anti-Racist. These are popular books about some of the topics of just how to think about these problems as not a kind of it's not a binary. You're either, you know, a racist or you're a great person. And like the reality is we all reinforce systemic racism every day by the things we do or don't do. And then some first person stories. Like there's a really good book by Wes Moore about it's called 5 Days. And it's about the 5 days after the killing of Freddie Gray by police officers in Baltimore. And what happened and how the whole kind of society of Baltimore had to react to that. And they look at all the perspectives, you know, the police, the judges, the activist, the family. And I think for me, just like getting more first person stories, just like you're learning more, you know, and that's what's been amazing is the number of people opening up. You see on LinkedIn, you know, Black tech executives who talk about being pulled over by police, right? And like you wouldn't think of them, they're like a big tech executive, and you wouldn't think of it that way, but yet they experience that. So it's everywhere. We just haven't really opened our eyes to it.